Hello, everyone, and welcome to Unclench Your Jaw with Nimu. I'm Nimu, strength and conditioning coach, somatic yin yoga therapist, mother of one, friend to many, secretly the most loved relative, and still very much the favorite sister. Someone who has also discovered that I've reached the age where when I walk into a room with absolute confidence, 30 seconds, I'm still trying to figure out why it is I walked into that room. Sometimes I remember, sometimes I leave the room only to remember the minute I sit back down. And so at this point, I am getting those steps that we keep checking our watches for. And not because it's planned, but through pure confusion. Anyway, welcome to Unclench Your Jaw with Nimu. It's a podcast for your nervous system, a place where we explore the stories that shaped us, the relationships that changed us, and the remarkable ways our bodies and minds learned to keep us safe. Before we begin, I'd like to invite you to arrive, and not just physically, but mentally too. Take a slow breath in, and then just let it go. Notice your shoulders. Have they been quietly carrying more than they need to? If they have, just let them soften a little. Notice your breathing. You don't have to change it, just notice it. And while you're here, notice your jaw. If you've been clenching it without realizing it, see if you can let it soften. Not because everything is suddenly okay, but for the next 40 to 50 minutes, you don't have to carry the whole world by yourself. Now, today's episode is called The Inner Critic. Last week, we met Kamau again. Do you remember him? He's a guy who I keep singing, and thank you, paying a little homage to Erica Badu with her song Tyrone, but in mine it's You Better Call Kamal. Because Kamal is a dependable man. He's the one everyone calls because, they know he'll pick up his phone. He's the one who carried everyone else's worries so reliably that he'd almost forgotten how to notice his own. We discovered that sometimes adulthood isn't really adulthood at all. Sometimes it's a child who became incredibly good at surviving. So today, I want to introduce you, or reintroduce you rather, to someone you've met before, Amina. You first met her as an 8-year-old girl carrying a certificate home from school. She worked hard. She was so proud of herself. And she wanted someone to ask about it. But life was busy, as it is, as it can get. Her parents loved her deeply, but there was always something more urgent happening. So Amina quietly folded the certificate, put it back into her school bag, and went to her room. She didn't stop achieving. She simply stopped expecting anyone to notice. Now, today, Amina is 34 years old. She's thoughtful, she's kind, she's reliable. She's the sort of person who remembers birthdays without Facebook. Thank you, Facebook, for reminding her. Or without Facebook having to remind her. She's brilliant at her job, the first to help when anyone is struggling, and the last to take credit when something goes well. If you ask people around who know Amina to describe her, they'd probably tell you she's compassionate, intelligent, and one of the most hard-working people they've ever met. If you asked Amina, on the other hand, the list would sound very different. But it's so fascinating, isn't it? I remember having a conversation with those many friends I'm talking about. The one who I'm also the one who I'm a favorite sister to, and we and my some relatives we were sitting out in a garden eating some fantastic food somewhere in Lavington. I can't remember what I think the place is called Kennedy. Hey, Kennedy. Absolutely brilliant food. And we're talking about how someone can see you as a rose, but you see yourself as a cabbage. And that stuck with me. It really stuck with me. There's so many times people what they have to say about you will surprise you because what you think about yourself is so different. So people see you as a rose and you see yourself as a cabbage. Isn't that sad? And fascinating, really. How two people can be looking at exactly the same person and see completely different things. One sees capability, the other sees inadequacy. One sees kindness, the other one sees not doing enough. One sees success, the other one sees all the places they could have been better. Somewhere along the way, many of us developed a narrator in our heads, a narrator who has an opinion about everything. The email you sent, the conversation you had, the mistakes you made, the way you look in the morning, the parenting decisions you made yesterday, the presentation at work, the meal you cooked, the holiday photo you nearly posted before you decided, I look a bit weird in that photo. Honestly, if that narrator had its own podcast, I don't think I'd subscribe to it. It would be exhausting. Meanwhile, please subscribe to Unclench Your Jaw with Nimu and share it with your friends and relatives too. Now, what's remarkable is we rarely question that narrator. We'll question the weather forecast, we'll question politicians, we'll question online reviews, but that voice, we always assume that it's telling us the truth. So today I'd like us to become a bit curious about it, right? Not because I want us to silence it. I don't actually think it's possible to silence it, but I do think we can understand it. And I think understanding changes everything, because here's something I've come to believe is I don't think anyone is born speaking cruelty to themselves, right? I've never met a toddler who dropped a biscuit on the floor and muttered, honestly, you're so hopeless. Children don't arrive in the world fluent in shame. They learn a language. And like every language, someone teaches it to them. Not always deliberately, often even without realizing it, but there's someone teaching it to them. And that's a conversation I'd like us to have today. Take another slow breath. Notice your shoulders, notice your breathing, and don't forget to unclench your jaw. So let's begin with Act 1. And Act 1 is Amina's promotion. Amina, like we've said, is 34 now. She's sitting in her car in the office car park. The engine is off, her handbag is on the passenger seat. She's been sitting there for nearly 15 minutes without moving. You'd think something terrible had happened. It hadn't. In fact, quite the opposite. Amina has been promoted. Her manager smiled as he handed her the letter. I've been looking forward to this conversation. You've worked incredibly hard, and everyone agrees you're ready to be promoted. Her colleagues have applauded. Someone brought a cake. Her phone buzzed all afternoon with, congratulations, Hongera, you deserve this. We are so proud of you. If you looked at Amina's day from the outside, you'd probably think she was floating on air. Inside the car, however, a very different conversation is taking place. What if they made a mistake? They're probably better people for this job. What if I can't do it? Why? Eventually, these people are going to realize that I'm not capable as they think. Then another thought arrives. You stumbled over one answer in the meeting this morning, and it lands with surprising force. Of all the things that happened that day, her mind chooses that moment. Not the congratulations, not the promotion, not the years of hard work that have led her to this space, but that one sentence, one tiny hesitation, one imperfection. She replays it again and again and again. And by the time she gets home, she's convinced that she doesn't deserve that promotion at all. Now, here's what fascinates me. Nothing outside Amina is criticizing her, not her boss, not her colleagues, not her friends. The criticism is happening entirely inside her own mind. Have you ever noticed how selective that voice can be? You could receive 10 compliments and one piece of constructive feedback. And which one do you think stays with you? You could have a wonderful week and yet lie awake replaying that one awkward conversation that probably lasted about 30 seconds. Our minds have an extraordinarily, hey, okay, this kikuiness of mine that refuses to hide itself. Our minds have an extraordinary ability to zoom in on what went wrong and quietly edit out everything that went right. It's almost as though someone has handed them a magnifying glass and said, Your job is to find your flaws. By the way, I've just thought, wouldn't it be fantastic if you guys counted the amount of times I errored and just comment in the comment box how many you counted? And we're back to the podcast. I wonder if you've ever experienced this, not the other errors, but that narrative, that narrator in your mind. Someone compliments your work, and you're there saying, it wasn't that good. Someone tells you they've enjoyed spending time with you, and you're like, I'm sure they're just being polite. Someone tells you you're doing an amazing job as a parent, and you're like, why, if only they knew how much I got it wrong. The compliment arrives, and somehow it never quite reaches you. It's like trying to pour water in a bucket with a hole in the bottom, right? No matter how much encouragement the world pours in, something inside just keeps letting it leak away. Here's the thing. I don't believe that hole appeared by accident. I think it has a history, and I think Amina's story might help us understand it. So let's jump into Amina's story. Stay curious, because in the next part of our conversation, I want us to ask what I think is the most important question for today's episode. When that voice tells you you're not enough, whose voice are you actually hearing? I'd like to ask today's question, and just like every week, I'd like you not to answer too quickly. When you speak to yourself, whose voice are you hearing? Not whose face do you see, not who do you blame, whose voice are you hearing? It's an odd question because most of us have never really considered that voice in our head, and may not have started there. We simply assume that it is us, mostly because it's our voice that we hear. But also, it's been with us for so long that it feels familiar. And familiar things have a funny way of feeling true. Have you ever noticed that if someone else criticizes you in exactly the same way you criticize yourself, it hurts? You'd think you'd be used to it. After all, you've probably been saying these things to yourself for years, right? But when another person says them out loud, something inside you recoils. Perhaps because deep down, part of you has always known those words weren't kindness, they were just familiar. One of the things I find fascinating, I know I find very many things fascinating, but one of the things I find fascinating is that we rarely question that voice in our head. If a stranger stopped you in a supermarket and told you, you're not good enough, you'd probably think, that's an odd thing to say. If a stranger looked at your shopping basket and told you, you should be doing better than this, you'd likely walk away, right? You certainly wouldn't invite them home. Yet many of us wake up every morning with that voice already making itself comfortable, commenting on how we look, how we're doing, how we're parenting, how we're working, how we're aging. Honestly, if that voice was a dinner guest, most of us would politely or not politely ask it to leave before dessert. And yet it stays, not because we enjoy it, but because we stopped noticing it. It's become the wallpaper of our minds, the background noise, like living near an ocean. At first, you hear every wave, do you know what I mean? Eventually, your brain decides this is normal. The trouble is, normal isn't always healthy. I often wonder how different our lives would feel if we became curious about our inner conversations just as much as we are about conversations with other people. Imagine a friend ringing you every single evening, and the conversation always went the same way. You embarrassed yourself today. You'll never get this right. Where? See, you're falling behind. Hi, everyone else seems to cope better than you. I wouldn't get your hopes up if I were you. After a few weeks or days, you'd probably stop answering the phone, not because you hated the person, but because you realize they're not helping. So why do we continue believing those same messages when they're coming from inside of us? I think it's because the voice doesn't introduce itself. It doesn't begin by saying, "Hi, what's up? Wallapa, I'm your inner critic." and I'll be making unhelpful comments for the next 50 years. Nope. It disguises itself as reason, as realism, as responsibility. It says things like, I'm just trying to keep you grounded. Don't get too confident. What? You need high standards. Listen, I'm only preparing you. It sounds sensible. It sounds even wise. But I'd like you to ask something. Has it worked? Think about Amina sitting in her car after receiving her promotion. Did that voice help her celebrate? Nope. Did it make her more confident? It didn't. Did it allow her to enjoy a moment where she had worked all these years to earn? It didn't, not in the slightest. The strange thing is that many of us believe self criticism motivates us. I'm going to say that again. Many of us believe self criticism motivates us, being that if we stop being hard on ourselves, we'll become lazy or complacent or selfish, would never achieve anything. But I don't think that's true. Think about the people who've encouraged you most in your life, whether it was a brilliant teacher, whether it was a coach, a mentor, grandparent, someone who genuinely believed in you. Did they motivate you by constantly reminding you of your shortcomings? I'd like to think they didn't. Huh? The people who changed us most rarely shouted the loudest. They saw something in us before we could see it ourselves. They corrected us when we needed correcting, but they never made us believe that our mistakes were our identity. There's a world of difference between saying you made a mistake and saying you are a mistake. Children don't always hear that difference, especially when criticism becomes more common than curiosity, especially when praise always comes with a but. You did well, but that's so good, but that almost, you almost got there, you almost, do you know what I mean? These things, little by little, the child stops needing somebody else to finish the sentence and they finish it themselves. And then one day, without even noticing it, the adult has inherited that job. They become the voice, not because they chose to, but because the voice became familiar enough to sound like home. Take a slow breath. Notice your shoulders. Notice your breathing. Don't forget your jaw. See if you can let it soften. Because in the next part of our conversation, I'd like us to go back to Amina as a little girl, not because we're looking for someone to blame, but because I think we'll discover where that voice first learned to speak. And once we understand where it came from, we can begin deciding whether it still deserves the microphone. Like those manosphere bloggers or whatever, take the mic away, take it out. Oh, please, take it away. Only people of a certain age will understand that song. Anywho, we're on Act 3. The girl who never quite got it right. I'd like to take you back to Amina, not the 34-year-old sitting in her car after her promotion, but the little girl you met all the way back in episode 1. She's 9 years old. It's a Saturday morning and she's helping her mom make some chapatis. Or more accurately, she's making chapatis that are every shape but round. And if you've ever made chapatis with a child or with me, you'll know that asking them to make a perfect circle is an act of extraordinary optimism. Amina is concentrating. You know that concentration of till the tip of your tongue is just sticking out, kidogo. She's rolling the dough. She's turning it. She rolls it again. And finally she smiles and says, I did it. She lifts it carefully for her mom to see. Her mom looks over and says, oh, that's good. Then almost without thinking, she reaches across, takes a rolling pin and says, next time, press a little more evenly around the edges. She smooths it out in seconds. There, that's better. The moment lasts less than a minute. Her mother isn't being cruel. She's teaching. She's helping. She's showing. In fact, if you asked her years later, she probably would not remember that this moment ever happened. But Amina does. Not because of the chapati, but because of the feeling. For one brief moment, she had been proud. Then, almost immediately, she had been shown how it could be improved. Again, nothing terrible happened. And that's exactly why stories like Amina matter. Childhood isn't usually shaped by one dramatic moment, as I keep saying, it's shaped by thousands of ordinary ones. Amina brings home a drawing. It's beautiful. You forgot to color this corner. She tidies her bedroom. Thank you. Next time, remember under the bed. She gets 94% in a spelling test. Excellent. But what happened to the other 6 marks? Have you noticed something? Every conversation begins with encouragement, but somehow it always ends with a correction. Children are remarkably good at spotting patterns, far better than we give them credit for. They don't remember every individual conversation. They remember what conversations usually feel like. Now for Amina, they begin to feel predictable. Whatever I do, there'll always be something else. Another improvement, another correction, another little thing that I should have noticed. Again, I want to say something that's becoming quite important to me throughout this season. This isn't about blaming parents. Most parents are trying to prepare their children for the world. We teach our children to look both ways before crossing the road because we want them to be safe. We remind them to revise because we want them to succeed. We point out mistakes because we want them to improve. Love often sits underneath correction. The difficulty is that children don't always hear intention. What they hear is repetition. Over and over again, Amina's nervous system begins to collect evidence. Being good is wonderful, being better is expected. Almost isn't quite enough. Those aren't conscious thoughts, they're quiet conclusions. And the conclusions that settle into the body long before they ever became words. By the time Amina reaches high school, something has changed. She checks every assignment twice before handing it in. If she gets 98%, she immediately wants to know what happened to the other 2 marks or where she lost those 2 marks. When someone compliments her work, she feels oddly uncomfortable. She begins by saying things like, it wasn't that difficult. Also, I could have done better, or it wasn't really that big a deal. Nobody taught her those exact sentences. She built them herself, one correction at a time, one expectation at a time, one tiny moment at a time. And then something quite fascinating happens. The adults no longer need to point out her mistakes. Amina has become wonderfully efficient at doing that herself. It's as though one day her brain quietly says, girl, I've got this from here. I've got this from here on in, babe. Imagine hiring someone to water your plants every morning. They come every day for years. Then one day you wake up before they arrive and think, I might as well do this for myself. That's what the inner critic often does. It takes over a job that once belonged to somebody else. Not because that somebody was bad, but because repetition creates habit. And habit eventually becomes identity. By the time Amina is 34, nobody needs to tell her she could have spoken more clearly in a meeting. Nobody needs to remind her about that one awkward sentence. Nobody needs to question whether she's good enough for the promotion. Her mind becomes astonishingly good at getting there first. Now, here's where the heartbreaking part comes in. I don't think her voice is even trying to hurt her. I think it's trying to help. Somewhere deep inside, it still believes if I notice my mistakes before anyone else does, if I improve before anyone asks me to, if I'm hard on myself first, perhaps I'll be safe. Take a slow breath. Notice your shoulders, your breathing, and don't forget your jaw. Because in the next part of our conversation, I'd like us to share something that completely changed the way I think about the inner critic. And I don't believe it's cruel. I think it's frightened. And that changes everything, right? So, Act 4, the body that learned to stay one step ahead. I want to tell you something that surprised me when I first learned it. Your brain is not designed to make you happy. You heard me right. Your brain is not designed to make you happy. And I know that's not exactly an inspirational quote you'd embroider onto a cushion, but it's true. Your brain has one job that sits above almost everything else, and that is to keep you alive. From an evolutionary perspective, your ancestors didn't survive because they were optimistic. They survived because they noticed danger, that rustle in the grass, the stranger approaching the village, the smell of smoke, the fruit that that might have made someone ill the day before. Brains that paid attention to threats stayed alive long enough to become our ancestors. Brains that wandered around admiring sunsets without noticing the lion, well, they don't have that many descendants left. Now, our brains are extraordinary at remembering danger. The problem is, your brain doesn't only learn from physical danger, it learns from emotional danger too. So for Amina, the danger was never being shouted at every day. It wasn't growing up in fear. Her nervous system learned something much quieter. Getting things wrong feels uncomfortable. Disappointing people feels unsafe. Being corrected feels painful. And over time, her brain reached a very sensible conclusion. Let's spot the mistakes first. Think about that for a moment. The voice that says you should have done better. It may actually be trying to prevent someone else from saying it first. The voice that whispers, don't get too excited. It may be trying to soften the disappointment if things don't work out. That voice that insists, work harder, it may genuinely believe exhaustion is safer than failure. And that's why I don't like calling the inner critic toxic, because toxic things don't usually believe they're protecting you. Protectors do. Misguided protectors, outdated protectors, overworked protectors, but protectors nonetheless. Imagine a smoke alarm. When it's working properly, it alerts you when there's a fire. That's incredibly helpful. But imagine that same smoke alarm going off every time you made toast. Eventually, you're no longer living in a house with a smoke alarm. You're living with a machine that has forgotten the difference between smoke and breakfast. The alarm isn't broken because it's malicious. It's broken because it's become oversensitive. Our nervous systems can do exactly the same thing. For Amina, making a mistake isn't just a mistake. Her nervous system quietly treats it like a threat. Not because she's weak, but because somewhere inside her brain still remembers that it once learned that mistakes mean correction, corrections mean disconnection, disconnection doesn't feel safe. Now, if you've listened to early episodes this season, you might remember something we spoke about before. Children don't simply need food, clothing, and shelter, they need connection. Our nervous systems are built on relationships. As children, belonging isn't just an emotion, just emotionally important. It feels essential. A child cannot simply pack a suitcase and move into a nicer family. They can't just wake up and say, "Me, I'm off," right? They depend on the adults around them for almost everything. So the child's brain becomes brilliantly adaptive. It asks questions like, what do I need to do to stay close to the people who look after me? Who do I need to become? For Kamau, the answer was, I need to be useful. For Nyambura, it was, I need to not ask for too much. For Amina, it became, don't get it wrong. Different children, different strategies, but the same goal. Stay connected, stay safe, stay loved. And here's the remarkable thing, those strategies don't disappear on your 18th birthday. Your nervous system doesn't just receive a letter on the 18th birthday or your 16th birthday, like your NI card in England, where on your 16th birthday you get your national insurance card. Brilliant timing. Your nervous system doesn't just receive a letter saying congratulations, you're now an adult. You no longer need these survival strategies. Instead, it keeps using what has worked, even when life has changed, even when the people around you have changed, even when the danger has passed. And that's why Amina is sitting in her car after promotion, feeling like she's about to be discovered or found out. Not because she's incapable, but because an old part of her brain is still asking a very young question. What if I'm not enough? The promotion isn't the problem. The meeting isn't the problem. The presentation isn't the problem either. They're simply waking up an old survival strategy. This is one of the reasons I absolutely love somatic work, because when we understand what's happening in the body, we stop asking what's wrong with me and we begin asking what is my nervous system trying to protect me from? And those are two very different questions. One assumes you're broken, the other assumes you're adaptive. And I don't think most people are broken. I think they're carrying brilliant strategies that have outlived the circumstances that they were designed for. So perhaps your inner critic isn't standing over you with a rungu waiting for you to fail. Perhaps they're standing at the front door, convinced that there's still a storm outside. It hasn't looked out of the window in years. It doesn't yet know that the weather has changed. Again, I want you to take a slow breath, to notice your shoulders, notice your breathing, definitely notice your jaw. And if it's softened a little during this conversation, that's not because we've defeated the inner critic yet. It's because we've stopped fighting it long enough to understand it. And sometimes understanding is where the healing begins. In the next act, I'd like us to explore one of the biggest myths we carry, that being hard on ourselves is what makes us successful. Because if that were true, Amina would be the most peaceful, confident person in the room. Instead, despite everything she's achieved, she's still waiting to feel like she's enough. Act 5, the myth of motivation. I'd like to ask you another question. Whoever taught us that kindness makes us weak? It's strange when you think about it. Most of us would never dream of motivating another person the way we motivate ourselves. Imagine your closest friend telling you that they're nervous about an interview. Chances are you won't lean over the table and say, don't get your hopes up too high. There are many other people who are much better than you. Remember all those mistakes you've made over the years? You'll probably embarrass yourself so badly. If you did, I'd imagine that friendship would not last for long. Instead, we'll instinctively say things like, you've worked hard, you'll do your best, you're lucky, they'll be lucky to have you, I believe in you. All these really positive things. And it's remarkable how how naturally compassion flows towards other people, and how difficult it can be to even offer a drop to ourselves. Somewhere along the way, many of us became convinced that self-compassion and self-discipline are opposites. As though the moment we talk kindness to ourselves, we'll stop trying. We'll stay in bed all day. We'll just eat cake for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I don't know if that's such a bad idea. It is. We'll forget to pay our bills. We'll become gloriously irresponsible. And that's a funny image, isn't it? I'm laughing here by myself because I do think it's a funny image. As though saying you did your best today somehow causes society to collapse. But that's not what I've seen. Not in therapy, not in coaching, not in yoga, not even in my own life. What I've seen is something quite different. People rarely change because they hate themselves enough. They change because eventually they care about themselves enough. Think about learning to ride a bicycle. Imagine a child wobbling down the road. They lose their balance, fall off, skin their knee. Now imagine an adult standing beside them, shouting, "For goodness sake, how many times do I have to tell you, you are hopeless? You'll never get this right." Will that child learn how to ride that bike faster? Or would they become terrified of getting back onto that bicycle? Fear can make us move, but it rarely helps us grow. Growth needs something else. It needs safety, encouragement, it needs enough confidence to risk making mistakes. And that's true whether you're 5 years old or you're 55 years old. Let's get back to Amina. She's still sitting in her car, promotion letter beside her, phone full of congratulatory messages. The voice inside her is working overtime. You're not ready. Don't celebrate too much. They'll soon realize they've chosen the wrong person. For years, Amina believed that voice was the reason she had been successful. She thought, if I keep pushing myself, I'll be okay. But if I stop pushing myself, I'll become lazy. If I stop criticizing myself, my standards will drop. This voice got me here. But did it? Let's look a little closer. Was it the criticism that kept her studying late into the night, or was it her curiosity? Was it the shame that made her care about doing a good job? Or was it her sense of responsibility? Was it the fear that made her kind to other people? Was kindness already a part of who she was? Sometimes the inner critic takes credit for qualities that were never its own. It stands at the finish line and says, "See, you needed me," when really it simply happened to be talking while Amina was doing the work. And there's a difference. Imagine someone who follows you around all day carrying an umbrella. Every time it rains, they say, "You see, if I hadn't been here, you'd have gotten wet." Eventually, you might start believing that you couldn't cope without them. But perhaps you've forgotten that you've learned how to find shelter, how to read the weather. Oh, those are black, heavy clouds that look like they're coming closer. It's going to rain. I need an umbrella. How to make good decisions. Perhaps you become stronger than that umbrella, than the umbrella ever realized. I sometimes wonder whether our inner critic is a little like that. It mistakes proximity for importance. It assumes that because it was present during every success, it caused every success. But correlation isn't causation. Just because two things happen together, it doesn't mean one created the other. Think back to Kamau. He became dependable because as a little boy, being dependable helped him feel connected. As an adult, that same strategy helped earn him promotions, respect, and admiration. But it also left him exhausted. Would we say his exhaustion caused his success? Of course not. His dedication did. His intelligence did. His willingness to learn did. The exhaustion was simply the cost of believing he always had to earn his place. And it's the same for Amina. Her attention to detail is a gift. Her willingness to prepare is strength. Her kindness even towards colleagues is genuine. Those qualities don't disappear if the critic gets quieter. In fact, they may become stronger. Because imagine how much energy she'd have if she wasn't spending half her day arguing with herself. Imagine finishing a presentation and thinking, "I prepared well. I wasn't perfect, but I communicated what matters. I'm proud of myself." Not because she's lowering her standards, but because she's allowing success to reach her. There's another thought I'd like to leave you with. Children often believe that love has to be earned. Adults sometimes believe that worth has to be earned. The critic keeps whispering, one more achievement, one more qualification, one more promotion, one more kilo loss. That one I know very well. One more perfect day. Then you'll finally feel enough. But enough is a horizon. You can spend your whole life walking towards it, and it keeps moving, because the problem was never the destination. The problem was the voice deciding you hadn't arrived. Now, I wonder what it would be like to consider another possibility. If you've spent your years believing that criticism is a price of success, I wonder what it would be like to consider another possibility. That perhaps excellence doesn't grow best in fear. Perhaps it grows best in safety. Perhaps the voice that helped you survive isn't the same voice that will help you flourish. Because in our final two acts, we're not going to try to silence that voice or fight it into submission. We're going to do something more surprising. We're going to meet it with curiosity. And we may discover that beneath all its harshness was a frightened part of us that has been trying to keep us safe all this time. Act 6, listening differently. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you might be expecting me to tell you how to get rid of your inner critic. I am not going to, because I don't think life would be quieter without it. And because I don't think healing begins with fighting, right? Think about it. If we spent the last 40 minutes, 30, 40 minutes talking about a part of us that developed to keep us safe, it would be rather strange to to end by declaring war on it. Instead, I'd like to invite you to do something much gentler. The next time that familiar voice appears, don't interrupt it straight away. Don't argue with it. Don't try and drown it out with positive affirmations that you don't even quite believe. Just notice it. Maybe that noticing sounds like, or maybe the voice sounds like you're going to mess this up, you should have done better, don't embarrass yourself, you're not enough, the usual. But before you respond, see if you can pause for just a moment, take a slow breath, notice your shoulders, notice your breathing, notice your jaw, as we've learned how to do. Then ask yourself one simple question: what is this part of me trying to protect me from? What is this part of me trying to protect me from? Not why am I like this? Not what is wrong with me? Just what is this part afraid might happen? You might be surprised by the answer. Perhaps it's afraid you'll be rejected, or you'll be disappointed by someone, or it's terrified of failing. Perhaps it's convinced that you'll stop striving, or that people will stop loving you. Whatever the answer is, see if you can stay curious, because underneath the criticism, there's often fear. And underneath the fear, there's often a younger version of ourselves who simply wanted to belong. Let's go back to Amina for one last time. She's still sitting in her car. Letter is still beside her. That familiar voice is still telling her you're not ready. And normally, she'd believe it without a question. Today, something different happens. Not because she's suddenly become confident, not because the voice has disappeared, but because she remembers the question. And she takes a breath. She notices how tightly she's gripping that steering wheel. Her shoulders are almost touching her ears. Remember the earrings we're talking about? That's what the shoulders are doing. Her jaw is clenched. She just lets out a long exhale. Then she quietly asks herself, what are you trying to protect me from? The answer doesn't arrive as words, it arrives as a feeling. A little girl who desperately wanted to get things right. A little girl who believed that mistakes might cost her connection. A little girl who tried so hard because being good felt safe. And for the first time, Amina doesn't tell the little girl to be quiet. She doesn't roll her eyes. She doesn't call herself ridiculous. Instead, she imagines the girl sitting beside her, not standing over her, but sitting beside her. And she says something that no one ever taught her to say. She says, thank you. Thank you for trying so hard to keep me safe. Thank you for believing that if we worked hard enough, nobody would reject us. Thank you for getting us here. Then she adds something else. You don't have to work quite so hard anymore. And I find that incredibly moving, because healing isn't always about replacing one voice with another. Sometimes it's about changing the relationship between them. The critic may still speak, but now there's another voice in the room, a calmer one, a wiser one, an adult one, and one that can say gently, I know you're worried. I know why you're worried, but I've got this now. That's what healing often looks like, not silence or perfections or never doubting yourself again. Healing is recognizing that the frightened child no longer has to drive the car, that the adult gets to take over the wheel. The child doesn't get thrown out. They're simply invited to sit in the passenger seat with a seatbelt, no doubt, and to look out the window and to rest. And perhaps for the first time in a very long time, and maybe that's one of the greatest gifts that we can give ourselves, is that we allow ourselves to rest for the first time in a long while. Not a promise that we'll never be afraid again, because that's not a promise that you can keep, but the reassurance that when fear shows up, it won't be facing the world alone. Take one final slow breath. Notice your shoulders. Notice your breathing. Notice your jaw. And if it's softened again, just a little, I wonder if it's because your body has realized something your mind is only just beginning to understand. You do not have to earn your right to speak to yourself with kindness. You've had it all along, and you've had that right all along. You've had the right to speak kindness to yourself all along. Act 7, becoming someone new. As we come to the end of today's conversation, I'd like us to visit three old friends one last time. You remember Mina, who we've just been talking about? She's a girl who discovered being good was one of the safest ways to move through the world. She grew up believing that if she worked a little harder, if she tried just a little more, if she could somehow become just a little better, then perhaps she'd finally feel enough. Kamau, the boy who learned that love often arrived after usefulness, the one who answered every phone call, solved every problem, carried everyone else's burden, even when his shoulders were already full. And Nyambura. Nyambura is a little girl whose thoughts, drawings, and feelings so often went unnoticed that she slowly stopped offering them. We spoke about, I think it was last week, we spoke about Nyambura. She learned to make herself smaller, quieter, less visible. And we've got three children here, three different stories, three different survival strategies. Yet underneath them all was exactly the same question. What do I need to do to stay connected? Children don't ask that question with words. Their bodies ask it. Their nervous system ask it, and then they spend years answering it. Some become perfectionists, others become caregivers, some disappear into the background, others become comedians, people pleasers, some become fiercely independent because depending on anyone else once felt too dangerous. Different strategies, the same hope. If I become the right kind of person, perhaps I'll be safe. The heartbreaking part is that many of us never realized the strategy was meant to be temporary. We carried into adulthood as though it's part of our personality. We stop saying this is something I learned and start saying this is just who I am. But those are not the same thing. One is a survival strategy, the other is an identity. Healing begins when we remember the difference. Perhaps Amina isn't a perfectionist. Perhaps she's just someone who learned that mistakes once felt expensive. Kamau isn't simply the strong one. Perhaps he's someone who learned that helping people felt safer than needing them. Nyambura is a naturally quiet. Perhaps she's someone who learned that disappearing hurt less than being overlooked. And can you hear the difference? One tells a story about character, the other tells a story about adaptation. And if something was learned, it can also be unlearned. Not overnight, not through positive thinking, not because you've listened to one podcast episode and woke up tomorrow completely transformed, although I wish that would happen. I wish healing worked that quickly. I'd have a much shorter podcast. Healing is usually much quieter than that. It happens in tiny moments. The moment Amina accepts a compliment without immediately apologizing for it, or the moment Kamau says, actually, I'm not able to help this weekend, and allows the silence that follows, or the moment Nyambura shares an idea before she's certain everyone will like it, that moment you catch that familiar critical voice, and instead of believing it automatically, you become curious. Perhaps that's what growing up really is. Not getting older, but becoming the adult your younger self needed. Not a perfect adult, not one who knows the right thing to say all the time, just someone who can sit beside that frightened child and say gently, I know why you're scared. I know what you're trying to protect me from. And thank you. You don't have to do this alone anymore. I often think we imagine healing is walking away from our younger selves, leaving them behind, growing beyond them. And I don't think that's what happens. I think healing looks more like turning around, walking back, sitting beside them, taking their hand and saying, yo, we're going to do this thing together. We're going to do this time together. So this week, I'd like to leave you with something to notice, not something to fix, just something to notice. Pay attention to the way you speak to yourself, especially after you've made a mistake. When something goes wrong or when someone offers you kindness, listen carefully. Whose voice is speaking? And then ask yourself something even more important. If that voice belongs to yesterday, what would today's voice like to say instead? Take one final slow breath. Notice your shoulders, notice your breathing, and notice your jaw. If it has softened, perhaps your body is recognizing something beautiful. You're never born believing you weren't enough, you learnt it. And because it was learned, it can be replaced, not with perfection or endless positivity, but with something much steadier: compassion, curiosity, and just that quiet confidence that you no longer have to earn the right to belong. Thank you for spending this time with me as always. If this episode reminded you of someone you love or perhaps helped you understand yourself a little more deeply, I'd be honored if you shared it with someone else. The conversations grow because you keep passing them on. And I'm so grateful that you do that. I want to thank one particular person, Vanessa, who's been listening to me from the beginning. I don't know Vanessa. We've never met. Not even sure what country she lives in, but she has been an absolute champion for my podcast. And thank you, Vanessa. This one goes out to you. Next week, we're going to explore something many of us experience without even realizing it. We're going to talk about how our bodies remember what our minds have forgotten. Until then, less judgment, more curiosity, be gentle with yourself. Don't forget to unclench your jaw. I am Nemo, and this has been Unclench Your Jaw with Nemo. So until next time, kwa herini en asante.